Hello and welcome to today's historic best of 3 deck tech for Izzet Drakes. A little quick side note before we get into it. For the next couple of videos, at least Magic the Gathering related wise, we're going to try and do a little different of a format, which just the deck tech. And if you would like to see the deck played in a couple of best of 3s, just leave a comment. And as long as it's relatively soon after the video is posted, I can bang out 2 or 3 games and chop them together and send it out, no problem. Now, on to the actual video. Izzet Drakes is kind of what the name would imply. It was a deck that at one point in time saw a lot of standard play. And it's basically... Hang on one second. I forgot to organize that. It is a... I guess you would call it something akin to like a mid-rangey sort of tempo deck, where it revolves around playing any one of your several Drakes that we have, and basically protecting them and adding to the amount of instants and sorceries you've either casted or have in your yard or whatever, and trying to protect them with, say, counter spells and such. And if you need to go late, you have a couple of Planeswalkers main board if you have to game 1 go against another control deck that might be able to otherwise outvalue you. That is the deck at its core. Now, the particular bits are, in the Drake category, we have 3 Sprite Dragons, blue and a red for a 1/1 Fairy Dragon with Flying and Haste. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, which is a good chunk of the deck, gets a 1/1 counter on it. It is a Drake that comes down early, and as you kind of just play the deck as it wants to be played, again, having 1 or 2 of your Drakes on the board and just protecting them, it will naturally grow larger and larger and help to really close out the game. The next Drake we have 3 Enigma Drakes, which is 1 blue and a red for a star 4 Drake with flying, where its power is equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. This Drake is nice because it doesn't, unlike the Sprite Dragon, the Enigma Drake can come onto the field and immediately have impact, where the Sprite Dragon takes several turns of, we'll say, accrued value in order to come online. Your Enigma Drake simply just comes into play with however much power relative to the amount of instants and sorceries in your yard. And the Enigma Drake and the Crackling Drake, which we'll get to in a second, both having 4 power, is a nice little, I guess we'll call it a break point against most common removal spells, since they both don't get hit by like a fatal push unless it's been revolted, but that's... And also, it's being 4 health helps to kind of ensure early trades against other board-based decks. And the next Drake, and the final Drake really, is Crackling Drake, which is 2 blue and 2 red for a star 4 Drake with flying, and its power is equal to the total number of instant and sorcery cards in your own exile and in your graveyard. And, which is very nice, when it enters the battlefield, it draws a card, so it replaces itself. Again, much like the Enigma Drake, it can come into play and immediately be able to impact the board. And it also sort of helps with, how do I word this? Besides being able to take value out of what's in your graveyard, the ability to take advantage of what's in exile is more relevant than some would think, seeing how a lot of people try to get cute with graveyard hate to turn off Enigma Drakes and such. And whenever people say exile all your graveyard, which is usually filled with instants and sorceries, the Crackling Drake kind of doesn't really care, since it does take into consideration what is in your exile. Now, the next category is the removal category, in which helps to sort of clear the board and go through blockers, as well as if we need to sort of stabilize our life total, we can do that as well. First removal spell, we have 2 Lightning Axes, which is 1 red for an instant, and for an additional cost to cast this spell, you either have to discard a card or pay 5 additional mana. and just deal 5 damage to target creature. Early on, this will kill pretty much anything it touches. And since it also is an instant itself and requires you to discard a spell, not only does simply by its nature of being an instant add towards the our Drake's power growth, usually you can chuck a dead card or even just another, say, instant or sorcery to get a double dip out of your power growth for your Drakes. The next removal spell we have 3 Spikefield Hazards, which is a instant for 1 red that deals 1 damage to any target, and if a permanent dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it. This is a nice little removal spell for multiple reasons. One, sometimes just dealing 1 damage for 1 is really all the deck needs, and the fact that it can go to any target means that even if your opponent isn't playing any creatures, you can just throw it at your opponent's face. Also, with the regularity that, say, your Sacrifice decks or your Arcanist decks kind of show up, it's nice to be able to force an opponent to exile permanents. And also, sometimes you just need 3 extra land drops, and we're a slower deck, so we don't mind having a land that comes into play tapped. Next removal spell, we have 3 copies of Abrade, 1 in a red for an instant, where you can either deal 3 damage to target creature, or destroying a target artifact. Now, the vast majority of the time, this is just a 2 mana, deal 3 damage to a creature. But the ability to destroy target artifacts comes up more than most people would think. So it is a little bit nice. And neither effect is terribly great for the mana cost, but much like the Spikefield Hazard, because it's effectively 2 cards in one, the fact that both of them are a little for their price is overlapped by the fact that they are in 1 card. It's the whole, the sum is greater than the equal of its parts or whatever. We also have, in the last slot in the removal category, we have 2 Bonecrusher Giants. The Bonecrusher Giant itself is a 2 in a red for a 4/3 giant. Whenever it becomes the target of a spell, the Bonecrusher Giant deals 2 damage to that spell's controller. If we needed to, this can just be a nice little, chonky threat that can help close out games. But we also have, and why we included it in the removal category, is the Adventure Stomp, which is also for 1 in a red for an instant, and it says damage can't be prevented this turn, and Stomp deals 2 damage to any target. Now, this is more often than not just a 2 mana deal damage to something. While the damage not being or can't be or unable to being blocked this turn is important, it doesn't come up a whole lot. But again, it's one of those, because it's 2 cards stapled to 1, we enjoy the value that brings to the table. Now, the next slot we have is for basically counter magic if we can't afford to kill or are unable to kill something once it hits the board, or if it will, say, totally just demolish our win and take it away from us. This is why we run counters. I'm running 4 Ionizes, which is 1 a blue and a red for an instant that says counter target spell. Ionize deals 2 damage to that spell's controller. Very simple, as most counter spells will be. It's a counter spell, so it's a pretty much catch-all, and shocking your opponent does help close out games, as well as, again, adding to the storm counter for all of our Drakes. I run 3 Sought Cummings, which is, at worst, is a traditional, or what is considered balance for counter spells now, which is just a 1 and 2 blue for a counter spell. Or if we need to, or have, say, a turn or 2, or 2 turns free, basically, we can foretell it for 2 on 1 turn, and then cast it for another 2 on another turn. Helps also if for whatever reason, our land drops are weird and we don't have access to the 2 blue mana needed. Sometimes it's nice to be able to space that out if we're running light on blue. And it's also, ideally, if you manage to foretell it, it's just a better OG counterspell. Granted, that does need to happen over 2 turns. Next, we have 2 copies of Negate. There's just a bunch of good non-creatures going around, from Cocos to Wrath of Gods to, I mean, hell, even if you have a risky thought, or a risky hand and they have a Thought Seize. We run a couple Negates just because it's a very good card. I'm also running 2 Jwari Disruptions, which is 1 in a blue for an instant that lets you counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. Just a nice little sort of tempo counter spell thing that, again, functions as a tapped land if we need it to. Much like the Spikefield Hazard, neither one effect is terribly great, but the fact they're on 1 card helps to elevate the unit as a whole above the sum of its parts kind of thing. Now, for our card draw and kind of late game value, that if we need to go a little bit longer, or like a little bit longer, of course being a relative term, we have 2 Behold the Multiverse, which is 3 in a blue for an instant, where you scry 2 and then draw 2. Pretty just nice, you know, scrying 2 and drawing 2, helping to filter out cards, get to what you need. Also, you can foretell it early on if you need to and have nothing else to do with your mana. Honestly, probably one of the better common card draw spells in the format, I believe, at this point. We also have 1 Chandra, Torch of Defiance, which is 2 and 2 red for a legendary planeswalker that starts at 4 loyalty, where you can uptick it for 1 to exile the top card of your library. You may cast that card. If you don't, or can't, Chandra, Torch of Defiance deals 2 damage to that opponent. It's basically a red form of repeatable card draw, and can sometimes bolt our opponent's face. You can also uptick her for 1 to add 2 red mana. Sometimes the 2 red mana can be so you don't have to lose tempo, and you can say play a Chandra and stomp something, or Abrade something, or lightning axe something, or even say foretell a Behold the Multiverse, because the foretell cost, or the cost to foretell it and put it into exile, is just 2 generic mana. Chandra can also downtick for 3 loyalty to deal 4 damage to a creature. Nice removal, and an ult that, like a lot of old ults, will basically win the game. Her ult being, when you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, this emblem deals 5 damage to any target. Again, it's an ult that once it basically enters play, the game is over and it's only a matter of time. I also have 1 Izzet Viceroy, which is 3 a blue and a red, for a 5 loyalty planeswalker, where you can uptick it for 1 to look at the top 2 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand, the other into your graveyard. This does several things. Besides being card draw, it does help you look a little bit deeper if you need it to. You can also say, get an instant and chuck another instant into the bin, again helping with the, in this case, helping with our traditional Drake's growth. Also, the fact that its wording is very particular, and it's why I run this card. It says, look at the top 2 cards, put 1 into your hand. It is not technically considered draw, so it manages to skirt things like a Narset Parter of Veils. Its -3 is basically a beacon bolt on a body, where raw deals damage equal to a target creature, or deals damage to target creature equal to the total number of instant and sorcery cards you own in your exile and in your graveyard. Again, oftentimes that number can be really high, can be a 4 or 5 removal, spell to just point at a creature to get it out of the way. And Raw's ult is when you get an emblem with whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, this emblem deals 4 damage to any target, and you draw 2 cards. Again, if you get to an ult, the game is basically over. But also, this being able to, whenever you cast even something very small, like a Spikefield Hazard, being able to also deal 4 damage and draw 2 cards. I would like to think these 2 ults are pretty self-evident why they close out the game. And again, one of my pet cards that I like to put in decks like this is Alrund's Epiphany, which is 5 and 2 blue for a sorcery. Create 2 1/1 blue bird creature token to flying, take an extra turn after this one, and then you exile Alrund's Epiphany. You can also foretell it for 1 mana less. Sometimes all this deck really needs is 1 more turn and a couple of additional bodies to simply close out a game. Of course, if you don't have Alrund's Epiphany, the deck still totally works. Just don't be afraid to up the numbers of other things by what you don't have of them. Land base, for the most part, pretty simple. Running 4 Steam Vents and 4 Spirebluff Canals as just fast, the fastest mana sources really the format has. For Izzet, we run an even 6-6 split of snow-covered mountains and islands, and we run 2 Faceless Havens as just a nice little backup creature to kind of sit on should our opponent be running a buttload of removal, which does happen a good amount of the time. Sideboard, we have 2 Grafdigger's Cages. Again, Coco, Muxus matches if you're really scared of them. Always nice to have a couple on your sideboard. 2 Aether Gust for messing with red and green spells. Mono red decks are becoming very popular again, which as a red player, I do love. And the occasional weird green shenanigans. It's just nice to be able to sort of buy yourself some extra turns if you need to. We run 2 Mystical Disputes as a, we'll call it a blue, or a counterspell targeting blue spells. Of course, if you need this in other matchups, you can bring it in. But I usually will only bring in a Mystical Dispute against other decks that are running blue. Running 2 Sweltering Suns, which is just a 3 mana damage sweeper that you can cycle if we need to. If you have an Anger of the Gods and don't have a Sweltering Suns, go ahead and run it. It's fine. I just happen to have Sweltering Suns, and I like the cycling. Running 2 Ashioks to sort of help with the aforementioned, say, like, Arcanist and, like, Oven decks and stuff. I run 2 Quakebringers as a way to hose opponent's life gain, as well as if a board state stalls out, being able to take advantage of the Quakebringer's effect to like passively add damage onto the board is a nice way to close out games. Run 2 Chandras as a way to dodge counterspells, and also put again another clock on the game, much like the Quakebringer, with Chandra's +2, because it will almost, barring some corner cases like an Aether Gust, will pretty much always hit the board, and the emblem will always be placed. I also run 1 Niv Mizzet as a way to also deal with decks that run a lot of counter spells. It's just a nice little creature that can sort of evade a lot of removal and get good value. Also, if you're running against like a really heavy like instant and sorcery using opponent, you can bring this in and kind of blow them up with their own plan. That is Izzet Drakes, a nice fun little mid-rangey tempo deck. I do hope you guys like this sort of new format. I figured we'll do the next 2 or 3 videos like this, and I'll see, you know, how they do, as well as with all the YouTube algorithm stuff that it tells me. Again, if you would like to see a couple actual full games played out of this, just leave a comment below, and you know, if I get enough of the next few days, I can run one out really fast. Now, and with that all out of the way, I suppose we'll call the video for today. Like the video if you liked it, sub if you like me, and if you have any sort of questions or anything you want to talk about, or well, anything you want to talk about relative to the video, that's what comments are for below. Thank you all, have a nice day, and stay safe out there.